Judges is filled with lots of difficult stories of ups and downs, a roller coaster, deliverance, and then falling back into bad behavior, and it's just ups and downs, and we've read some stories already up through this chapter, including the one we read last week of Gideon and his family, specifically Avimelech, his son, that are similar in the way that they don't portray people behaving well and weird family dynamics. I mean, to put it mildly, for those who weren't here last week, Avimelech is Gideon's son through a concubine, not through an official wife, a lower caste wife, if you will. He winds up killing almost all 70 of his brothers. One brother gets away. I guess he kills 70 brothers. One brother gets away. But there are some similarities to this week's story, you'll see, but the overall feeling that we get from Judges is that there's lawlessness, that there's no leadership, no consistency. People do well for a while and then they fall and into really bad behavior. And we've seen it a little bit. We've seen it's been touched. We've touched on it, which is that this also sometimes causes inter-tribal warfare. You're going to see that today too. So all those elements are kind of wrapped up in the Jephtah story. It's not the most famous part of Judges, but it's up there in probably the top three. As we talked about Deborah. We've already seen Deborah. The most famous is Samson, which we're going to get to next week. But this is up there, the story of Jephtah. And again, for those following along, we are in chapter 11. And let me just get this up here. Again, it's good to see everybody. And happy Hanukkah again. And I want to do one thing before I forget, because Reverend Lynn saw this, and I know some of you have also seen it, but some of you have not seen it. And I know when Reverend Lynn shared it, when she shared it with me, I think it just came out a week ago, and so as I was telling her I don't know, Lynn, who sent this your way? This thing I'm going to share right now.
A friend, Sue Cohen.
And we're booking into 2020.
So I will share it just briefly, but I'll put up the link because it's really funny. Very clever.
It is good.
And I thought,
and as you said, especially with the Sondheim connection this week.
Exactly. So Stephen Sondheim, who just passed away, wrote the lyrics to this original. This is a parody of the West Side Story by 613, one of the great Jewish a cappella bands.
Blessings reciting on Hanukkah. Chocolates were partying on Hanukkah. Family uniting on Hanukkah. I made a clay dreidel to spin. Why does it only land on chin? Sufgani up with my family. I'll take a latte if you please. Chocolate money on Hanukkah. Latkes and crunchy on Hanukkah. Presents from Bobby on Hanukkah. I want a puppy for Hanukkah.
So, yeah, that is the West Side Story Hanukkah, which again I'll post the link for everybody so that you can So you can see it's very cute, and it's one of those like things like the Maccabees did in the last few years that are really clever, and they get shared around. And this one,
I thought it was great advertising. No doubt you guys could put together a group and go out there. And
you're absolutely right. The Manhattan Jewish Experience, which is an organization that's funding Jewish activities, especially for young unaffiliated Jews. It's done through an modern Orthodox bent, but it's very it's very good effective advertising. So they have a pretty large budget, but it is a great advertising. I mean, it's one of the greatest examples of kind of like doing viral marketing that I've ever seen in the Jewish community. So I posted a link up there in the chat. You can see it. And again, it's hit. I mean, it's gone viral. So Reverend Lynn beat my Jewish contacts by a day. So she's pretty good. I would say she's pretty connected. I was very impressed. And so, have fun with that. But we're going to, on a kind of a sad and serious note, change directions. It's not exactly the Hanukkah family story that we want to share, but it's a story that a lot of people aren't familiar with, the story of Jephtah. And so the part that we finished with last week was after the story of Avimelech, that the people again did bad, and they get punished with other people attacking them. And in this case, it says the children of Ammon, which are the Ammonites, they crossed over the Jordan and fight against Judah and against Benjamin and against Ephraim. And so it shows the Ammonites didn't just cross over in from the north into northern part of Israel, into the Galilee, into the Golan Heights. They actually cross into the south and kind of affect everybody. It also says that God was fed up and said, I'm sick and tired of you worshiping other gods. Go cry out to them. Go, let those gods deliver you. And the people of Israel say to God, no, we've done wrong. Deliver us one more time. And they put away their gods. They didn't just ask and beg for forgiveness. They put them away. And it says that God changed his mind. And it says that the children of Ammon gathered together, they mustered their armies, and they went to Gilad, which is the part of Israel that's in the north, in the modern day Golan Heights. And they came together at Mitzpeh, which is a fortress in that area. There are other Mitzpehs, but this Mitzpeh is the one of Gilad. And the people and princes of Gilad said to one another, what man is he that will begin to fight against the children of Ammon, the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilad. Now, what's interesting here is Gilad's not a tribe in itself. It's part of the Manassites, actually, part of those people that have lived on the east side of the Jordan River, but in the again modern day Golan, and they kind of like are identified here not as Manassites or even that half tribe of Manasseh, whatever. They're actually referred to as Giladites, and Gilad was one of the children of Manasseh, one of the descendants, and he's now kind of like, or they're associated with they're associated as kind of like not a tribe, but of that area is called Gilad now. So that's where we are. And Rosemary, if you take it away, now we're reading about this guy.
Now Jephtah, the Gileadite, was a mighty man of valor, and he was the son of a harlot, and Gilad begot Jephtah.
Okay, so pause right there, because it actually says he's the son of Gilad. He's actually not just from the sub-tribe, the group of Gilad. He's actually Gilad's son. But like Avimelech in this previous story, his mother is not from the top class of people, if you will. As a matter of fact, here flat out, it says she's a prostitute, a harlot. By that, it's saying she's not even a pilegesh, which is the word that's used for Avimelech's mother. A pilegesh was a concubine, usually translated as a concubine, as a kind of, again, an unrecognized wife. This is a zonah, which is the word for a prostitute in other parts of the Bible that we've already read, including Genesis, including Leviticus. When it talks about a prostitute, it's talking about someone who literally is like on a night to night basis. This is not like, this is a story of obviously an unlikely hero, which we have other versions of, including the previous one. Well, Avimelech's not a hero, but he's a powerful guy. He's a leader. This is a story of a leader emerging from, again, inauspicious beginnings, to put it mildly. But like, I mean, first of all, it's not high praise for Gilad that he's having children with prostitutes, obviously, but it's putting this kid into a situation where he's essentially an illegitimate son, and so he has it's not just that his father's powerful and he's essentially not going to have power. He carries this with him, as you're going to see from this story. It's putting him behind the 8 ball, to put it mildly, from the very beginning. So, I mean, you'll see what happens with this story.
And Gilad's wife bore him sons, and his wife's sons grew up. And they drove out Jephtah and said to him, "You shall not inherit in our father's house, for you are the son of a strange woman." Then Jephtah fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tov, and idle fellows joined themselves to Jephtah and went out with him.
Yeah. So it seems like, at least at some point, Gilad has him living with the family, or around the family, or the brothers knew about him because they drove him out. So he's somehow raised with them in a way, because he flees from them. I mean, he has to run away. It seems like his father dies. It doesn't say that, but we assume that his father dies. When his father dies, this is when this all happens. And they basically say, "You're not going to inherit from our father," and he flees from them. Now, it doesn't say he has to. It doesn't say they were going to kill him, but he gets away from them. And it says he lives in the land of Tov, which Tov, of course, means good, right? Tov is like one of those basic Hebrew words, but it also says Eretz Tov, which seems like a place, like an actual destination, that there was a place called Good, which isn't a very creative name for a place, but it some people say this is a a euphemism or a nickname for another place, possible, but also very possible there's a place called Tov. And what's important about this is that Jephtah goes there, and it says, the translation is horrible here, idle fellows. I mean, that must be, somebody must have copied that from somewhere else. The word in Hebrew, anashim rekam, we've had before, which is a rake, which I told you before is kind of funny because it's an English word too. A rake is somebody who has the Hebrew word rake in Hebrew. Also, it's usually translated as baseless or worthless. The word rake in Hebrew is the root for the word empty. And so there's a understanding here that a person who is a rake is someone without value, someone without morals, someone without any decency, all these kinds of things that they're without, the basic kinds of human qualities of decency. Those are all the connotations and associations with this word. Idle seems to just mean like they're lazy, or they don't do anything. It's not it. I mean, it's not the only definition of the word idol, but that we oftentimes think about it that way. No, these are bad guys. And you're going to see that he has essentially like a gang around him. This is a gang of mercenaries slash, bandits, whatever you want to say. These are guys that you can see are not idle in the sense that they sit around and do nothing. They seem to be fairly violent people. So here's what happens.
And when the children of Ammon made war against Israel, the elders of Gilad went to fetch Jephtah out of the land of Tov. And they said to Jephtah, come and be our captain, that we may fight with the children of Ammon.
Yeah. So this is the story that, we kind of read before. The Ammonites are making incursions into the land. And so they go to Jephtah. Everyone's with us so far. The irony is now these people have come back to him to ask him to be their captain, to be their leader in war. It's clear that it's war. It's the word ilachma is to go to battle. It's not, be our leader. It's to fight. And so they are asking a guy who assumedly is a rough guy to be their leader. Now, we already know that the people that he's been hanging out with, his fighters or his crew, are not good people. The Giladites don't care. We know that. Now, again, there's this irony that they're in the land of Tov, they're in the land of good, and they're not good people. I mean, there's definitely a play on that there, which is that these are not necessarily bad people, but they're not the kind of people that you should be associating with. I don't say they're evil. It doesn't say they're evil, but they're baseless. They're without merits, if you will. It's not just that they're poor. That's not the word for what rake implies. But they know what they're doing. I mean, when the people of Gilad come to these guys, they know who they're getting. And they're getting one of their own, but they're getting one of their own who they, number one, kind of chased out. They've got somebody whose mother was a prostitute and who's hanging out with bandits. This is a guy who is essentially wasn't raised on the wrong side of the street, but it was chased there and is now being asked to come back. It's a great story. It's a great setup. It's a great setup.
And Jephtah said to the elders of Gilad, did you not hate me and expel me out of my father's house? And why have you come to me now when you are in distress? And the elders of Gilad said to Jephtah, therefore we turn again to you now that you may go with us and fight against the children of Ammon and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilad.
So here he says flat out, you chased me away. You threw me out. And now you come back to me. And they don't really have an answer. There's no good answer for why they did what they did. They did what they did because they felt justified in treating them like garbage. I don't have an answer, but they basically say, we want you to be our head, which assumedly now means we're turning everything over to you. You're now in charge. I mean, that's what essentially they've said. And so they're saying you're going to fight against them, but you also get to be the Rosh, you get to be the head over all of us. So with there's not really an apology here, but there is a recognition that we're asking you to fight for us, but we're going to make you our head. So there's not an apology, but there's a recognition and a turning over to him of their he's now going to be the authority. So let's see what he says.
And Jephtah said to the elders of Gilad, if you bring me back home to fight against the children of Ammon, and the Lord deliver them before me, shall I be your head?
So Yiftach does something that we're going to see is something he does, which is he's striking bargains. And in this case, he's really only asking for clarification of what they've already said to him. So they say, here's what they say.
And the elders of Gilad said to Yiftach, the Lord is witness between us, if we do not so according to your words. Then Yiftach went to the elders of Gilad, and the people made him head and captain over them. And Yiftach uttered all his words before the Lord in Mizpeh.
So they say, God is our witness. They say, Adonai is our witness. So essentially they're saying, if we don't do what we say, God will punish us. So they make their pact at Mitzpeh. And
Yiftach sent messengers to the king of the children of Ammon, saying, what have you to do with me that you are come against me to fight in my land? And the king of the children of Ammon answered the messengers of Yiftach, because Israel took away my land when they came up out of Egypt, from Arnon as far as the Yabok and the Jordan. Now, therefore, restore those lands again, peaceably.
Yep. So Yiftach comes to, or sends messengers, doesn't come to, he sends messengers to the Ammonites and say, why are you fighting? Why are you going to war why are you in our land? And the Ammonites, the king says back to him, because Israel took away our land when you came in from the land, when you came in from Egypt, you made your way up. You took our land. Now, you and I and most of us who were reading the book of Numbers and again repeated in the book of Deuteronomy, and then again later on, it's a big theme here. Yeah, this was not supposed to be part of the promised land. It's not on the other side of the Jordan River. But remember who we took the land from. He's going to tell him. He's going to give him a little history lesson.
And Yiftach sent messengers again to the king of the children of Ammon and said to him, thus says Yiftach, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the children of Ammon. But when Israel came up from Egypt and walked through the wilderness to the sea of Suf and came to Kadesh, then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, let me, I pray you, pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not hearken. And in like manner, they sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. And so Israel remained in Kadesh. Then they went along through the wilderness and went round the land of Edom and the land of Moab and came by the east side of the land of Moab and camped on the other side of Arnon, but came not within the border of Moab, for Arnon was the border of Moab.
This is all stuff that we read, exactly the way we read it in the book of Numbers, that Israel asked for permission when they came out of Egypt to walk through Moab, to walk through Edom, Moab, and Ammon as they were making their way into the land, and then cutting across. We asked for permission to do that. You didn't give us permission. You didn't give us permission, and so we didn't walk through your land. We asked, you should have done it because we're all descendants of the same family, right? We're not, they're descendants of Lot, and then Edom is descendant of Isaac. I mean, he's even closer related. We're related, right? We're children, not of Avraham, but we're all children of his father, Terach. We're all children of Terach, if you will. We're all Hebrews. You didn't show us hospitality then. Didn't show us hospitality, basic hospitality, but it gets better.
And Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, let us pass, we pray you, through your land to my place. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his border, but Sihon gathered all his people together and pitched in Yahatz and fought against Israel.
Yes, and this is the war that we fought against Sihon and Og, right? These are the kings that were Canaanite kings that were on the other side of the Jordan River, just above where Moab and Ammon were. And the Bible tells us this in Numbers. It tells us this again in Deuteronomy, and again, kind of like all the way along, we've been reminded that's how we wound up with those tribes living on the other side. The Gadites, the Reubenites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, inherited tribe on the east side of the Jordan because of this. It's repeated again in Joshua. It seems so important because it's not part of the original promised land, but we wound up with it because we went to war against these guys. And here's what happens.
The Lord God of Israel delivered Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they smote them. So Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites, the inhabitants of that country. And they possessed all the border of the Amorites from Arnon, even as far as Yavok, and from the wilderness as far as the Jordan. So now the Lord God of Israel has driven out the Amorites from before his people Israel. And should you possess their land? Will you not possess that which Chemosh your God gives you to possess? So likewise, that which the Lord our God has voided before us, that shall we possess.
Yep. And so what Jephtah just did was give him a history lesson, which is we didn't take the land from you. We took it from the Canaanites. We took it from the Canaanites. Our God gave us that land. Your God gave you other land. And he literally says, your God, Chemosh, who's their version of our God, if you will. We read about Chemosh, the Ammonite God. You have Chemosh, you worship Chemosh. If he gives you land, it's your land. We have a God, our God gave us this land, and you get your land, we get our land. Now, the fact that our land happens to be on your side of the border doesn't change the fact that we won it. We won it in battle, and you didn't. So you take it up with your God. Our God gave us this land. And he literally says, the Lord God of Israel. It says, Adonai Elohei Yisrael, the Lord God of Israel, which seems to indicate that at least Jephtah, the way he's presenting it is, you can have your God, we have our God. It's not like the God gave us our land and you take it up with the God, you know. Doesn't say that. You have your God, we have our God, and that's that. Is this an indication that, you know, he believes that there could be other gods? Maybe. Does he do this as a negotiating tactic to just kind of say, look, these are the facts. I'm not going to get into a theological argument with you, but take it up with your God. You know, these are all possibilities. The bottom line is he gave him a history lesson and said, this is not, you have no claim to this land. The land that we live in, the Gileadites live in, it's given to us by God. We took it in battle. It's ours. Good luck. Go away.
And now, are you at all better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive against Israel, or did he ever fight against them? While Israel dwelt in Heshbon and its hamlets, and in Aror and its hamlets, and in all the cities that are along by the shores of Arnon for 300 years, why did you not recover them within that time?
So he's got extra arguments. He doesn't leave it just with God gave us this land and we took it in battle. He says, first of all, are you like Balak, the great king of the Moabites who hired, if you recall the story from Numbers, right around that time, that Balaam, you know, was hired by King Balak to curse us and to try to get us without going to war against us, because he couldn't go to war against us. And he basically says, you remember that guy Balak who was really powerful, that he's not Ammonite, but he's Moabite. He's from the same area. You remember that guy? He couldn't go to war against us, right? You know, he couldn't fight us. You think you can fight us? You're not even half as good. You know, he's not saying half as good, but you're nothing compared to Balak. And yet he couldn't go to war against us. So that's kind of a recognition that Balak was a pretty powerful king. He's saying, you can't, he couldn't go to war against us, and you're going to go to war against us. And then he also says to them, we've lived here for 300 years. 300 years. And now you're going to war against us? Why didn't you do something over the last 300 years? If this was your land, why didn't you take it back in the last 300 years? So we've been here now since the time of Moses, 300 years later, which is roughly how long it would have been. If you do the math, from about 1300 to about 1000, right before the time of King David, it's about 300 years. You have 300 years to do something. You haven't done anything in 300 years. Now you're doing it, right? Now, probably because they're weaker, and the Ammonites are now stronger. I mean, it is what it is, right? But he says for 300 years you haven't done it, so you've recognized our territory for 300 years. It's another argument.
But I have not sinned against you, but you do me wrong to war against me. The Lord the judge be judged this day between the children of Israel and the children of Ammon. Howbeit, the king of the children of Ammon did not hearken to the words of Jephtah, which he sent him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephtah, and he passed over Gilad and Manasseh, and passed over Mitzpeh of Gilad, and from Mitzpeh of Gilad he passed over to the children of Ammon.
So it says that he's got the Spirit of the Lord with him, Ruach Adonai, the Spirit of the Lord. Now that seems to be a pretty powerful thing. And so as he is coming over from Gilad and from the greater area of the Manassites, comes over from Mitzpeh of Gilad, he's now going to war against the Ammonites. And you already have heard, he's got the Spirit of the Lord on him. So he's been touched. He's ready to go to war. And now here's Jephtah.
And Jephtah vowed a vow to the Lord and said, if you shall deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering.
So he goes into battle and he makes a promise. If God gives him victory, that he'll offer up the first thing that comes out to greet him.
That sounds dangerous.
Yeah.
Witcher fans will recognize the lost prize.
Right.
So those who are also familiar with Greek mythology will also notice some similarities, which is why I say this is the most Greek of the stories that we have, the most not Jewish kind of feelings to this story. Specifically the Iphigenia myth, the Idomenia myth. There are Greek myths of people sacrificing to the gods their children because of a promise that they make, especially almost always connected to a battle. Look, this was fairly common practice in the ancient world. The difference is it's usually not the king who sacrifices his own child. Maybe a few other children that were handpicked to be sacrificed, but not usually the king's own children. Because assumedly you're taking the leader's kids, and if the leader kills his own kids, there's no one to lead in his place. So that's one of the kind of implied tragedies in this, is that how would this happen? Now we will read, and we'll get to it several months from now, we'll read of a story exactly like this, where the king of the Edomites sacrifices his son on a wall in battle in front of everybody so that he will win and be victorious in a battle. The story is very weird for a lot of reasons, not least of which is it seems that it's actually effective. I don't want to get there yet. When we read the story in the book of Kings, it's very troubling because it doesn't seem like this magic is ineffective. That's the weird thing. God, you know, we'll see what happens in the story, but yes, the setup for this story is bad. There's a real question whether this was obviously not a good vow to make, but there's also this question of whether, you know, obviously anybody should ever make a vow of this serious of a vow, or an open-ended vow, or these kinds of vows. But it does say an olah, which is a burnt offering. The context for this is always a sacrifice, a burnt sacrifice. And olah means literally a burnt sacrifice, something that burns and then goes up to the sky. That's what olah means. It's not just a sacrifice. It's not just killing, but literally killing and then being burnt, which is why it's translated as burnt offering. So here's the battle. The setup is the setup. The battle, not so interesting, but let's read it.
So Yiftak passed over to the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he smote them from Aroer as far as Minit, 20 cities, and as far as Avel Keramim, with a very great slaughter. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally 2 verses of battle. For those looking for really great battle details, it's not here. It's not about the battle. It's just a very great slaughter, and it's a rout. And the Ammonites are now subdued. They have surrendered, if you will. So that's it. It's one of the least descriptive battles we have in the Bible. There's also often not a lot of descriptions. You've seen Book of Judges has, you know, we've already seen some battles. Battle of Deborah, a little bit more detailed. Some of the other battles, Gideon's battles, much more, you know, detailed. What they take into battle, how they fight, shofars, those kind of things. Not so much here. Because again, we're going to get to the key part here, which is.
And Yiftak came to Mitzpeh to his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances, and she was his only child. Beside her, he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her that he rent his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot go back."
So let's read the end and then we'll come back to it.
And she said to him, "My father, if you have opened your mouth to the Lord, do to me according to that which has proceeded out of your mouth, seeing that the Lord has taken vengeance for you of your enemies, of the children of Ammon." And she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go and wander down the mountainsides and bewail my virginity, I and my friends." And he said, "Go." And he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her companions and wept for her virginity upon the mountains. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed, and she knew no man. And it was a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughter of Jephtah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year.
That's the end of chapter 11. That's the story. Now, let's go back and read and kind of study what just happened. On the face of it, well, let me ask the question to those assembled here today, the minion that we have of people. What happens to Jephthah's daughter? Anybody want to throw out what they think happened to her?
She threw herself a party and then gave herself over to be sacrificed.
And
people remember, the other girls remember her every year. It's an excuse to go into the mountains to party.
and she was indeed killed, right? Sacrificed.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody
She
else?
sacrificed her virginity. She was raped.
Okay. Anybody else?
It sounds like a story that got made up to explain a custom that was maybe a little too pagan for the people writing the story.
Yeah, other than the fact that the made up story is not acceptable either. But anybody else has any take on this?
We don't still have that festival.
No, and it doesn't seem like it lasted or was pervasive amongst everybody, but it does say Israel. It doesn't just say the Gileadites. It says that there's a Jephthah's daughter festival. We never learn her name, by the way. I mean, it doesn't say her name. You didn't miss it. There's a tradition her name was Selah. We don't know, though. Look, this story is a horrible story for a lot of reasons. It's a tragedy. I mean, it's just a horrible story. It's not the end of the story, by the way. We're going to get to the end of the story. It's the end of Jephthah's daughter story. I will tell you that there is differences of opinion, which is fine. It's why we had differences of opinion on what happens to Jephthah's daughter. There is another
version where she gets rescued? Like there's a version of Iphigenia where she gets rescued?
Yes, there are versions of that story where she isn't killed or she's rescued by Artemis, or there's different versions of the story that it's not a tragedy. No, the best possible outcome, which no one laid out, is that she just is shut away and never gets to know a man, because the story says that she knew no man. Now, that seems to be like secondary to the fact that she's dead, maybe, but the reason that it says that, some people say, that she becomes a virgin. She becomes a perpetual virgin, and that this story is a story of a woman who essentially becomes a nun, if you will, but not even like, it's a vow of celibacy rather than that she's killed. Look, I think the plain version of the story is that she got killed, that when it says that the father did to her according to that which he had vowed, means that he offered her up as a burnt offering. But there are differences of opinion. And I will tell you that from the Middle Ages on, the commentaries in Christian commentaries, because Christians also had comments about this, because there's, obviously for Christian soldiers and knights and kings and people like that, there's kind of a cautionary tale, of what you should promise and those kinds of things. So people studied it. There are Christian commentaries and Jewish commentaries on this that are kind of lined up, that she is not killed, that she is not killed. Look, I mean, it doesn't say she's killed, but it seems to imply that she's killed. When they lament her, it doesn't say that they lament that she's a virgin. It says that they lament her in the sense that usually the context of it, not always, but we would assume that she's dead, that they bewail the daughter of Jephtah who is sacrificed. She's killed. She becomes a kind of a tragic icon for young women, which they probably was culturally more significant in some ways than at times when women had essentially mythologies or inspirations that were unique to their circumstances. I mean, we don't have as many of those today, because our celebrities and our heroes and our tragic figures even are usually not owned by one gender, but I don't know. I don't know that people feel that way about, Amy Winehouse, or I don't know, any of the tragic stories of women who died, and usually guys too, who entertainers and people who are famous who died too young or were sacrificed. I think, Princess Diana wasn't exactly a child, but, people kind of recognize that she was sacrificed for celebrity, for a paparazzi, a victim of that. I don't know. I mean, we have our own versions of these kinds of people who become mythic in their death, but it's a sad story. There's no good, she doesn't get rescued in this. The best that we have is that she just doesn't ever get to have a child. Of course, what we take away from this is that Jephtah sacrificed his future. So Jephtah has no other children. Now, look, we have to say, and we have to point out that think about this story, the bookends of this story for Jephtah. He's the child of a prostitute. And what does he do with his own daughter, right? She's not a prostitute, on the opposite. She's a virgin. She dies a virgin. So that's part of the tragedy. I mean, part of the weird, like, circle of this story, of this guy's life, is that his mother's a prostitute and his daughter dies a virgin. And this tragedy where he's a part of the tragedy. He's the connector, if you will, but he's part of this tragedy of women essentially being victimized. And obviously he's part of the problem, but there is this circle, if you will, that closes with his daughter. So keep that in mind. I mean, that's where the story began. Jephtah, the son of a prostitute. So again, as you pointed out, there seems to be a custom, a known custom at that time, because the way that the Bible lays it out, this is what women do. There's women who do this. They take part in this ritual. So it's a really tragic story. Now, before we move on and read the end of Jephtah's story, did this have to happen? Did this outcome have to happen? Did Jephtah have to do this? Because he says that he has to do it. The daughter says he has to do it. But did he have to do it? I mean, where in the world does he have to do this? It goes completely against Jewish tradition from the very beginning, from Abraham. Abraham's not allowed to sacrifice Isaac. You can't sacrifice people. We know that. The first Jew learns that. So what happened to this point? Now, look, some people point out it shows you how far Israel has strayed, that they're practicing human sacrifice like the Canaanites. And they're not happy about it. It's not, hey, look, we're going to do what the Canaanites do. But they do it. And if they do it, then they're behaving like the Canaanites. So this is bad. This is really bad. Bad behavior, bad actions, bad consequences. It's bad. But was there nobody that could step forward and stop this from happening? I mean, we know that Jephtah is powerful, but is there no religious power that can say, stop this, don't do this? And they knew it was happening. It said there was 2 months. 2 months there was. Like, people knew that this was happening. His daughter goes off with her friends for 2 months, and nothing can happen in 2 months.
Maybe they don't care because it's just Jephtah.
Maybe.
What I was going to say was maybe it's almost conscious, because they don't want somebody from the other side of the tracks leading them. And this is a way to
This is a way to make sure he doesn't have a dynasty.
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe. There's an interesting midrash on this, though, which I think tells us a lot about Jewish values, because the midrash was from the rabbinic period, and so they're kind of applying their values to it. But it's a great midrash, I think. And so the story goes, the midrash says that Jephtah definitely didn't have to do this, shouldn't have done this. There's no reasonable society, system, religion that Jews had that would have allowed this to happen. So he makes a vow. You can get out of your vow. You make a vow, you do. They didn't have Kol Nidre then, but they had ways of getting out of a vow. You make a sacrifice, you do another sacrifice and say, I made a bad vow. I can't fulfill the vow. So what could he have done? Well, he goes to the priest. Now, the rabbis in there trying to figure out who is the priest at this time. It doesn't specifically say, but they actually say that it's Pinchas, that It's Aaron's grandson, Eleazar, the son that survives, that becomes the next priest, the next high priest, the Kohen Gadol. His son Pinchas becomes Kohen Gadol. How do we know this? Because we read about Pinchas taking over. Now, is he still alive? This would be pretty old, right? He's alive during the time of Moses, so he's like hundreds of years old by this point. But he shouldn't really be that old. But I mean, shouldn't still be alive. But if he's still around, he's the high priest. The rabbis have a reason for him being the priest, is that he has the power to abrogate this vow. And Jephtah had the power to, and the wherewithal to come to him and say, I made this vow, get me out of this vow. But the interesting thing we know about Pinchas is that he's zealous for the Lord. Remember, he's the one who spears the Midianite and the Israelite when they are doing their orgy for Baal back in the desert. So we know he's very zealous for God. But the rabbis take away from that there's a downside to that, which is that someone who's that narrow-minded and focused and that fundamentalist can't see beyond the letter of the law and can't use compassion to guide them to do what they should do, which is that he should have gone to Jephtah and say, no, let me get you out of the vow. Jephtah, as a leader and a good leader, should have sought help for this horrible vow that he made, and should have gotten out of the vow and should have stepped down off of his pedestal and said, I made a mistake. I need to get out of this vow. And so the rabbis teach, because these two guys couldn't do the right thing and couldn't step out of their roles that they played, that an innocent woman died. And so the tale is a cautionary tale that the rabbis took away from this, which is this could have been avoided, not just because the guy did something stupid. People do stuff stupid all the time, but you can fix it. But it takes compassion, and it takes subduing your ego, and it takes, being a good leader who also can ask for help and say, I made a mistake. And if you don't do that, innocent people die, including your own family. And so there's a takeaway from this, which is, an innocent woman died, a good person died, who it could have completely been avoided if the guys had stepped out of their way, stepped out of their own way.
What if the only child was a man, a boy? It would have been a very different
It's an interesting question, because it seems as though he was bent on doing it no matter what. I mean, look, I think that the interesting thing about her being a daughter is that it closes that circle of his mother being a prostitute. It seems like he loves his daughter. I mean, he doesn't seem to be glib about this. He doesn't just go, hey, it's a daughter, I don't care. It's his only kid. And he doesn't seem to. What's interesting is that for a guy who, was raised on the wrong side of the track, or at least has that story of his background, he doesn't seem to be like some of these other kings and leaders. And I mean, look, the guy's a bandit, or hanging out with bandits. He's not living a lewd life. He doesn't have 25 kids, and all different 70 kids like Gideon had. He seems like he's at least not, a debauched, leader of what he could have been. I don't know. I mean, there's something about this story. First of all, there's something about this story. I don't think it's just made up. I mean, I think there's definitely mythic elements to it, but there's something about this story that actually strikes me as this was a tragic thing that happened. The rabbi's midrash on it, I think, is an interesting one, because it shows how women oftentimes get caught in the crossfire, but it also is, a lesson that leaders, make decisions, and their families oftentimes pay the price. And look, I'll throw it out there just because it came across my mind this morning before we came to class. I don't know if I should even do this, because people are it's something to think about. just something to think about. Since Reverend Lynn, you brought it up, I'm gonna throw it out there. Something struck me about this morning, because I always look for connections. I'm just going to throw it out there. The most tragic character in the Trump household is I think most of us would agree, I'm just going to throw it out there, is Ivanka. And I'm not saying that because she's Jewish. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there's something about her that most of us who pay attention to politics and pay attention to characters see as something, that there's something there that is deeply tragic for a lot of reasons. I don't want to get into it. But there's something about her that makes her a little bit like Jephtah's daughter. I'm not comparing her. I'm not going to, somebody goes away and goes, I can't believe you said that. But there's something about her that really strikes me as somebody who's had to pay a disproportionate price for the fact that that's what she's had to live with her whole life. And again, I'm just throwing it out there because we look for connections and we look for how things play out and there's difference, I know, but there's something about it that struck me as a Jephtah's daughter type situation, which is
that her good name and her whatever was sacrificed for
anything
her.
Anything that she'll ever do will be tainted by that. And so again, I know the factories and we're doing, I know that, but to me, it seemed like she tried to navigate, only because of what we do know about her, is that she did try to navigate a line of behavior that was not like her brothers. I'm only pointing it out. I mean, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about it before, but I'm pointing it out a little bit because of what Reverend Lynn said about sons. And there's something to me about, and maybe because I'm the father of 3 daughters, there is an interesting situation that you're in that I see as a father, which is that your daughters are responsible for your decisions, even when they're not made with the sense of and trying to impact them because they're women. But because they are women, by nature of their being women, the decisions that you've made now resonate with them in a way that you can't get out of. So I know where you're
That's not
going.
true.
Do you think that's different than with sons?
That was my question.
Great mind.
I think that there still is. I think that there still is a difference. I think that daughters, for better and oftentimes for worse, carry the legacy of their fathers in a way that it's a weird, it's not, and again, it's not, I don't think there's anything you can do about it. Maybe sometimes it's good. I don't know, but sometimes it's bad, and it's disproportionate for the daughter because she's a daughter. I'm only saying it
Because women,
I think about
because
it.
women are less independent than men.
I think it's partly because they didn't have as much control for a lot of human history, a lot of
Look at the story.
history.
Jephtah gets in trouble with his family, and he runs away and takes up with a band of outlaws and has a decent life in spite of the fact that his family rejected him. But she can't do that. There's nowhere she can go. She goes
Right.
up to the mountains, but she can't go find another tribe. And if she was a son,
Right.
maybe she would have been able to do that.
Yeah.
So as a woman, she's trapped in
Right.
that situation.
Yes.
And I feel that women are
She can't
oftentimes trapped.
honorably leave her family the way a man can.
And I think that still exists. I think that there's still a stigma or a stain, if you will, attached to people, especially disproportionately daughters, because I think sons are, even that when they're not in a situation where they have to go off and start their own tribe, if you will, but but there is this sense that they can chart their own destiny in a way that I think oftentimes daughters can't, which I don't, again, it's probably only because they weren't given the same rights and had the same opportunities. But there's something about this that really strikes me as profoundly unfair. And again, I'd use that word that you used, trapped, that women are oftentimes trapped by the decisions that their fathers make in a way that I just don't see it. I don't see that sons have that, because maybe, again, as people are suggesting, and I think it's fair to say that they had more opportunities, that they could have charted their own destiny. The son could have run away and done something else. Maybe that's what could have happened in the story. But the point is, there's something really poignant about this story because she's a woman, and it's not just because her grandmother was a prostitute. By the way, what if her grandmother was still alive? What did her grandmother say to her? When that happened. I mean, it's possible. There's no reason that her grandmother wasn't alive at this point. Maybe she wasn't, but maybe she was.
I
That's an
also,
interesting
I think
conversation.
it would be fun to do a sort of a spontaneous play about a son rather than a daughter, and what the responses would be of the community, of the father, of the son, as opposed to the daughter.
Yeah.
Would be an interesting exercise.
or if the daughter did run away to the grandmother or something else and lost her
Right.
virginity in the mountains. Suppose she comes back pregnant or no longer a virgin. There seems to be a huge focus on the fact that she was still a virgin.
Because she's worth more. She's worth more as a virgin.
Right, but suppose she comes back from the mountains. She didn't go to the mountains to lament. She went to the mountains to have a good time. She went to Vegas to lose her virginity and gamble away everything she had because she knew she was going to die. Would he still have sacrificed her? Would it still have been as valuable a sacrifice?
Well, I think
See,
the
we could really build on this.
Yeah, I think the idea is that because she didn't want this, horrible destiny to fall on her father. And so she went up into the mountains where she couldn't lose her virginity because there weren't any men up there. Instead of, forcing her father to offer a defiled sacrifice.
Mm,
Yeah,
right.
I find the whole thing rather troubling that she does this because, like in a holy way, that her father's sacrifice shouldn't be, he said this to the Lord, this is what the Lord expects, and that she backs him up. It's like the whole story, doesn't really belong to us. This is something that we don't sacrifice human beings. And yet the story seems to say this is okay. Nobody comes out and says this is a terrible thing. That he did this, that he killed his own child.
Well, the rabbis don't like it.
Yeah, the rabbis either whitewash it or they either say he didn't really kill her. I mean, especially from the Middle Ages on, or they say that it could have been avoided and it didn't have to happen.
How do the Orthodox deal with this story? Like,
okay, so that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So first of all, there's an Orthodox Jewish writer, Naomi Rogan, who's lived in Israel for the last 50 years or so. I think she's still with us. I believe she is.
I think she is. Yeah.
Her first book was called Jephtah's Daughter, and it's a story of a woman who gets married off in ultra-Orthodox world. She was one of the first writers that started writing about ultra-Orthodox life for ultra-Orthodox women.
What's her name?
Naomi Rogan, Ragen, Reagan, but it's pronounced Rogan. She's written a few books, and this was her first. It's called Jephtah's Daughter.
And
And-
Safta is another
What?
one. Safta?
Jephtah's Daughter.
Safta's
Sota.
another one of her books.
so
Sota, yeah.
Yes.
Sota
another
is one of her. Sota is probably her most famous book.
Yeah.
So Sota is the woman who gets accused of adultery, right? In the Bible,
Yeah.
the law of Sota. So that's a story. Obviously it's a story about adultery on the Orthodox world. So the Orthodox know the story. It's
read, isn't it?
So that's an interesting thing. So yes, the story is read. I was just going to say that, Judith. Thank you. It's read as a haftarah, right? It's one of the few stories from Judges that we actually read as a haftarah. Here's the interesting thing. The haftarah that we read, the reason that we read this is we read it the week that we actually read that story from Numbers. So the week that we read Numbers, the story of Sichon and the war against Sichon, we read the story of Jephtah. So that we read this story and we're reminded that, oh yeah, the stories from the Torah get revisited in the books of the prophets. And here we have like literally a quote from we have a quote from the Torah from there. So here's the interesting thing though. So when we read this as a haftarah for Parsha, for the Parsha, here's where we finish it. We finish it right here. We finish it in verse 30.
Before they
finish in verse 33.
Interestingly, too, we read this on Good Friday.
What?
It's a Good Friday reading for us.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
In the new lectionary.
Oh, so it wasn't, it's a modern,
Not traditionally, right.
It's a modern reading. So how long ago do you
Right.
think they added this as the lectionary reading for Good Friday?
About a month ago. It's
What?
It's,
What, really?
Seriously?
it's Gaffney's new lectionary for the church.
Oh, okay. So it hasn't been taken up by the church. Well, I
So
love
maybe
it.
2 months ago.
I love it as a lectionary cycle. So again, the church's
Oh, I do too.
the church's cycle to include this story, at the time when you have the sacrifice of Jesus is very,
Right.
that'd be very profound, because again, we've seen the story of Isaac has always been seen as the prequel, as the foretaste to Jesus' sacrifice, right? So that's why the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, is such an important story for Christians, because it's the story that says, oh, Abraham almost sacrificed his son, but God really sacrificed his son. So that's why you see depictions of the Isaac sacrifice all over churches, right? It's one of the most frequently depicted stories in the Torah. So the story of the near sacrifice of Isaac here, and this story is actually, no, there's a person who actually got sacrificed. Now, again, it's not a good story. It's not a story that we want to celebrate, but it's a story of consequences, right? It's a story that we got to take away. What does it mean when this happens? So to answer Judith's question, we don't focus on the end of the story, right? Which, like, what happened to her? Because we do read that he made the vow, but we don't read what he did. So the decision to cut it at verse 33 is clearly an attempt to not get to the hard part. But people do know it. And again, the fact that the church has now included it in that people would actually study this and read this is a really interesting question, because it really gets to when a society or when a people allows for this to happen, what does it say actually about the society? I mean, I could take away a lot of stuff away from this, but this is an indictment of the people that they allowed this to happen, for sure. The whole situation is a bad situation that they got into, and the way they got out of it, at least in battle, is by the sacrifice of an innocent girl. The interesting question is that why they won? I mean, did God deliver them because God knew on the other end there was an innocent young girl being sacrificed? There's no condemnation of what happens here. There's no
Right? That's the whole
God,
thing. That's why this
there's
is
no, and God said this shall never happen again. God doesn't stop it. God doesn't, and God's not there to stop the sacrifice. Which again leads us to what happens to Jesus. So the takeaway from this is the consequences from it are something that we have to deal with as the readers and as the inheritors of this story. And again, when we read these other stories of human sacrifice, which we have other stories of human sacrifice alluded to, detailed, it's horrific. It's the most horrific thing we can imagine. I mean, I think we can imagine. It's people knowingly killing their own family, killing their own children, killing their future. And in this case of Jephtah, his entire future. He has no other children. So the story of Jephtah is, if it's not the most tragic story, it's one of the most tragic stories that we have in the Bible. But it's not the end of Jephtah. Jephtah hasn't died yet. We don't know what happened to Jephtah's rule, his time as a judge, if you will. What happens to Jephtah? So let's read chapter 12, which is also not studied, is not taken into consideration, in some ways not really well known, but you do know this part. Well, you're going to see a part that you may have known. You may know. Okay.
And the men of Ephraim were mustered and crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephtah, why did you pass over to fight against the children of Ammon and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house upon you with fire. And Jephtah said to them, I and my people were at great strife with the children of Ammon, and when I called you, you delivered me not out of their hands.
Yeah. So the people of Ephraim, the nearby tribe of Ephraim, the very powerful tribe of Ephraim, one of the leaders of the north, they say to Jephtah, why did you not bring us up when you went to fight? And he said to them, well, we've been fighting with them for a while and you haven't done anything. And you're coming to us now that we've beaten them and now you want to be part of it. And again, Ephraim didn't just say, why didn't you call us? We're going to burn you guys down now. That's your punishment because you didn't let us fight with you. We're going to war with you. So this is, again, the worst example of a intertribal warfare. They are threatening Jephtah. As you know about Jephtah already, guy's not a guy you want to mess with.
Remind me again why they're fighting.
Why is Ephraim fighting? Or why Ephraim was left out of the battle? That's it.
They didn't get any loot.
Why are any of them fighting at this point?
Oh.
I've lost track of that.
No, because the Ammonites crossed over. They went to war against the Ammonites. The Ammonites had assaulted all of Israel, but the Gileadites were the ones who took matters into their own hands and defeated them.
Is it territorial?
Yeah, but at this point, there's now war. There's spoils, right? And now they're like Ephraim saying, "You didn't include us in the battle. Like you didn't call us into battle. We would have jumped in." And Jephtah's answer is, where were you for the last, whatever amount of years that we've been dealing with these people? We're the first people that they hit. Whenever the Ammonites cross in, we're the first people they hit. Where have you been? And he's like, you don't get, where do you get off? Where do you get off telling us we should have included you? You never fought with us before. So, you've never been there before. And now, he's continuing.
And when I saw that you delivered me not, I took my life in my hands and passed over against the children of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then are you come up to me this day to fight against me? Then Jephtah gathered together all the men of Gilad and fought Ephraim, for they had said, you of Gilad are outcasts of Ephraim amongst Ephraim and amongst Manasseh.
So they get up like they're going to fight with Yiftach. They're going to fight with the Gileadites, and he takes them up on it. You're going to fight against me? Okay, fine. You'll have a battle. And again, he's only part of the Manassites, but he made, the Ephraimites made him feel like garbage. He said, you're outcasts of Ephraim and you're outcasts of Manasseh. You're nothing, right? You're the lowest of the low. They don't say, hey, and by the way, you're the son of a prostitute, but it's probably implied there that, you guys are losers and you're nothing compared to us. We're Ephraim, right? We're the tribe of Ephraim. And Ephraim was a big tribe. Remember, Ephraim and Manasseh are both descendants of Joseph. These are Joseph tribes or Rachel tribes. They're descendants of Rachel, which is also, by the way, back there in the background too. Not just Joseph, but Rachel is in the background, because the three Rachel tribes are Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. Those are the three Rachel tribes. So she's in the background too as a matriarch. So, but here's not only intertribal battles, but also interfamilial tribes, because tribal battles, because Ephraim and Manasseh should have been getting along. They're Joseph's descendants. They're connected. They're more connected.
And Gilad seized the passages of Jordan before Ephraim, and it was so that when the fugitives of Ephraim would say, let me cross, that the men of Gilad would say to him, are you an Ephrathite? If he said no, then they said to him, say now, Shibboleth. And he said, Sibboleth, for he could not frame to pronounce it right. Then they took him and slew him at the fords of the Jordan, and there fell at that time of Ephraim 42,000.
Yeah, this is a major battle. 42,000 people would be a huge amount of soldiers. So Ephraim and Gilad go to battle against each other. Ephraim gets routed, and as they're coming back into the land of Israel, into Ephraim from the Jordan River, as they're crossing back over, the crossings are taken by the Gileadites, and as these refugees, as these stragglers, the remnants of the Ephraim army are coming across, the Gileadites test them to see whether they're from Ephraim, and they have a test. They make them say the word Shibboleth, and they can't say Shibboleth; they say Sibboleth. They can't make that sound. It's a dialectic difference. And so they can't say it. And so as soon as they say it, and they can't say it, they kill them. So it's a test. And the word shibboleth it's an English word. If you look it up, the word shibboleth, we don't use it a lot, but it's a good crossword word. It's a good vocab word. It's a test. It's a way of testing someone based on their locality and where they're from, to see to see if they really are from the place that they say they're from. So yeah, it's funny to try to do that, but I was listening. Colbert had Rosamund Pike on last week, where they were talking. She's in the new Amazon show, and she talked about how when she plays Americans, she'd have to say certain words and she couldn't say them. I don't know if anybody saw it, but she said she has a real problem with the word murder. It always came out with the English murder. She couldn't say it, so she'd put a pencil in her mouth and try to train herself to say the word murder, and over pronouncing the R's, because obviously English people sometimes have a problem with R. Sometimes tease my wife when she can't say her R's, but so there are shibboleths between Americans and English people. Oftentimes those are things that we use to kind of see where they're really, where are they really from. But yeah, this is the original shibboleth was you're gonna die if you can't say it right. So it's pretty bad, and that's a lot of people that got killed in battle because the Gileadites are like, you wanted a war with us, you're going to get a war. And they rout the tribe of Ephraim. I mean, they just routed them and are killing them as they're coming back into the country.
Wait a minute, I've lost track. When they first called him to Jephthah to come and attack the Ammonites, wasn't it the Gileadites that did that? Wasn't
Yeah,
Ephraim?
so these are the Gileadites that are killing the Ephraimites. These are
Right,
these are-
they called him to come in after throwing him out. They called him to come fight
Yeah.
these people, and now he fights these people, and they want all his stuff.
no, yeah. Well, he fought the Ammonites, and now the Ephraimites wanted part of that, and now he's fighting them too. So
Yeah.
the interesting thing about it is that he started out just fighting the Ammonites. Now he's fighting the Ephraimites. In the meantime, he had to kill his daughter. Is this, stuff's fallen out of control? There's no question that things have gone off the rails. But this is part of the story. Like, people forget that the story of Jephtah the Gileadite doesn't end with him defeating the Ammonites, our enemies, our non-Israelite people. He winds up killing a lot of his own Israelite brothers in battle. This is part of that. I mean, Rosemary, read the last line.
And Jephtah judged Israel for 6 years. Then Jephtah the Gileadite died and was buried in one of the cities of Gilad.
That's it, folks. That's it. First of all, he doesn't reign for very long as a judge. His 6 years is not a long time. Was he older when he took over? Did he die? Did he of battle? Did he die of some other disease or whatever? He didn't live. He wasn't a judge for a long time. Doesn't say why. You can take away, like bad life, bad, tragic, God killed him, whatever. I mean, I don't know. He doesn't last for very long as a judge. But there's no comment that God hurt him, God was disappointed in him, that he killed his own people. I mean, killed his own people, other Israelites. He doesn't say anything about that. It's just he ruled for 6 years and he died, and he's buried in Gilad. That's it. That's it. That's the Gileadite judge, Jephtah, who killed his daughter, killed the Ammonites, and killed lots of Ephraimites. That's it. He dies after 6 years.
It's like one of those books or a movie even that you're really involved in, and then all of a sudden it just ends. It's
Yeah.
like they just got tired of writing it, and so they just finish it.
What do you even like? What? There's not even a judgment on the judge. There's no judgment on
Right.
who he is. There's no judgment on what he did.
Well, sure, his judgment is he only gets 6 years.
I know, but it doesn't even, like, you and I can take that away and go, yeah, he only judged 6 years. But let's finish up. We only have 6 more verses and we're almost done. We're going to finish up today, I guess. Well, we're not going to get into, there's no sense in getting into the next story, which is our man Samson. I mean, we talk about a tragic story. That, by the way, we probably won't even be able to read that in one session next week. Probably going to have to read it over a couple of weeks, because Samson is one of the most developed stories in the Bible. Definitely the most developed story in Judges. We read about his birth. We read about his birth narrative. We have his famous death scene. I mean, we really get a lot of details about Samson. There's other details we don't get that we want to have. We almost have to, like, again, we have to develop the midrash on. There's like huge holes there. We're like, what? You just skipped that part. But it is a very detailed story, and it's a little bit longer. I'll show you when we finish up. But let's read what happens here after Jephtah dies. There's only a couple verses.
And after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. And he had 30 sons and 30 daughters, whom he sent abroad, and took in 30 daughters from abroad for his sons. And he judged Israel for 7 years.
Yeah. So he only gets 7 years. Is he a good judge? Is he a bad judge? He doesn't say anything other than he sent his kids overseas to school. They went to Paris to study. I mean, I don't even know what to make of that. I mean, like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? He gets 7 years, but he is a judge.
It sounds like a prison sentence. He gets 7 years.
I don't know.
Some would say it was.
He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. I mean, that's obviously a pretty big family, and sounds like it's 7 brides for 7 brothers. Well, he does get 30 more daughters for his sons.
Thanksgiving was awful.
The focus, by the way, isn't on what happens to his 30 daughters, but the 30 sons come back with 30 foreign wives. I mean, I assume that that's not a good thing. I'm only assuming because
That's how he made his treaties. He had 30 daughters. That meant he could make treaties with 30 tribes.
Yeah, and
so he
again,
did that.
assumedly they're bringing back their foreign gods and that kind of stuff. But that's his. That's this guy. I mean, we don't. That's it. I mean, we look with 2 verses about him. We don't know anything about. Well, 3rd verse. Yeah.
Then died Itzvan and was buried at Bethlehem. And after him Elon, a Zebulunite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel for 10 years. And Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried in Ayalon in the country of Zebulun.
That's it. I mean, that guy got 2 verses. He only gets 10 years too. So I don't know.
And after him, Avdon, the son of Hillel, a Piratonite, judged Israel, and he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons that rode on 70 ascolts, and he judged Israel for 8 years.
Again, this thing with the asses and the people riding around on I mean, I don't know. We already read about, Tola, from the tribe of Issachar, who has also a lot of children riding around on donkeys, on asses. I don't know. That's it. These people, we don't learn anything about them other than they had a lot of kids, where they came from, where they died.
And their chosen method of transportation.
In some cases. Why we have that, I don't know.
And Avdon, the son of Hillel, the Piratonite, died and was buried in Piratan in the land of Ephraim in the mount of the Amalek.
I don't know why there's an Amalekite mountain in Ephraim, but clearly there's Amalekites living there. And that's the end. That's, as you can see, that's the end of chapter 12, which is only 15 verses. Now, that's because when we get into the next story, it's the story of Samson, which starts in chapter 13, goes into chapter 14. Chapter 15 is still Shimshon, Samson. Excuse me. Chapter 16, still got Samson. And the end of chapter 16. So that's 4 chapters about Samson. That's and not short chapters. I mean, this is a pretty developed story in the book of Judges. It's 20% of the book of Judges is the story of Samson. It is definitely in the context of the rest of the book of Judges when you read it, and it's kind of right there in the middle or towards the end, last back section. By the time you get to Samson, you're like, oh yeah, these are themes that we've seen before already. Tragic stories of heroes that just make bad decisions or are kind of forced into living lives that are just out of their control. And when we look at Samson in that context, which we now have, if you read Samson by itself or know the story of Samson, it's probably, as I said before, really the only story in Judges that most people have ever heard of before. It's the only part of Judges where like there's name recognition. Seriously, I mean, a lot of people don't really know the Jephtah story. A lot of people don't. It's not a story that we obviously teach to kids. And the Samson story, interestingly enough, kids do learn, even though the story is really troubling and is really in some ways very inappropriate for young kids. There's something, because he's a superhero, he's got superpowers. He really does have superpowers. Because he has superpowers, it's captivating for kids. Like, it's a story that, like, when you read it as a kid, you're like, oh wow, that's a crazy story. I love that story. It's in the context of Judges, though. And you got to remember, it's part of this pattern of the Israelites get a leader, the leader delivers them, and then they screw up again, and then another leader, and then keep, so that's that cycle, right? And we talked about at the very beginning, that's the cycle. So by the time we get to Samson, we've seen the cycle already, and so he's part of that cycle. So you can't really take it out of context. You can't really say, well, there's a story of Samson, he's like this guy who lived at a time when, no, but this had already been happening. This, like, there had already been people like Gideon, and there had been Jephtah, and there had been these people that are just like, oh my gosh, what a messed up story. So it's part of a series of messed up stories, which then leads us to the time of the kings. And so there's a real power to the book of Judges. I've said this before, the Judges is actually one of my favorite parts of the Bible. I think Judges and the book of Samuel is my favorite book of the Bible, my favorite section of the Bible. And Genesis, those are my favorite parts of the Bible. But Judges really is one of my favorite parts of the Bible, because the people, like I'm a sucker for those stories where, you've the complexity of these characters are just like, they call out to you to like, oh yeah, life isn't black or white, right? It's the stories of it's why I'm a sucker for Sopranos and those kinds of stories. Like you look at the stories and you're like, ugh, I'm rooting for the wrong guy, and it's that kind of thing where you realize, yeah, life is strange because there are people that we look at and they're complex. The heroes that we have in our world are complex. The lives that we lead are not all easy, and they're not always made with decisions where we go, well, I had an easy decision to make here. No, you probably didn't, and you probably have a dark side too, and you probably had some things you were trapped in, and you couldn't figure out a way, but it didn't make it any easier, and it didn't make it right, and all of these things that we get left with the book of Judges. And so to me, it's like those stories that, some people don't like these kind of stories. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who want a hero, and they want to know, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. I don't know, man. I read the story of Jephtah, and like every time I read it, I'm like, he's horrible. And I'm like, but is he horrible? I mean, like, what went on in his mind? Like where's this guy who gets chased away from his family because his mother's a prostitute? Like all these kinds of things like stick with me. And I'm like, these are not easy people. This is the way the world is. So I love these stories. They're not easy, and they're not happy stories, but to me, they're like the Bible stories in their essence, where God is not kind of like interrupting them. God doesn't step in for the most part and fix the story. There's no angel that comes in at the end of the story to stop Jephthah's daughter from being killed, like Abraham has. These are the stories where people actually have to live the life that the consequences. So it's the story of Jephtah is one of those stories that stays with you once you read it. Once you've had a chance to digest it, it doesn't leave you. You're not the same person after you read the story of Jephtah and realize that it's not an easy answer for life and for the way we live our lives and for the decisions that we make. So a lot more questions than answers at the end of it. So thanks everybody for being here, for Jephtah, for sharing some of your day today, your Hanukkah with us. And go watch if you want to laugh, watch the video that I posted up here for the West Side Story. So the West Side Story Hanukkah tale. And then go back if you want to watch the Maccabees do their Hanukkah song too, the parody of Dynamite, which is now like 14, probably 13, 14 years old. It's still good. Anyways, a lot of good Hanukkah songs and good stuff. We hope to see everybody either tomorrow night for our Torah study. There's Board and Brush event coming up. There's the party at our house, which we hope you can make, the Vodka Latka party, which we are very excited about, and we'll see you Friday night. So everybody stay good and happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, everybody.
Happy Hanukkah. Thank you, Rosemary, for reading. Thank
Thank
you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.